Hi, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is the second in my series of videos on John Dee and Edward Kelley's Great Table of Earth. I'm assuming, of course, that you know who John Dee and Edward Kelley are, that you have some interest in the Enochian corpus and know what it is, and that you've watched the first video in this series. So if that's not too much to assume, I will go ahead and start this presentation and share my screen here. What we're going to look at today is the Tablet of Union or Black Cross and what it represents and how we know it represents that. So usually people today use a Tablet of Union either in Roman letter equivalents like this or in the Enochian letters themselves like this. Over here, I've also added in the L of the governor that goes with El Exarpe, the first one, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Since I can tend to be long-winded, though I try not to be, here's a more long-winded version of what we're talking about. That is, we're going to look at how understanding the blind in the last video of the governors and the multi-lettered squares affects what we mean by the Tablet of Union or Black Cross. This also was in an article that I wrote with my late husband, Alan, that came out about 15 years ago. I'll drop a link to that below if you'd like this in article form. And since he was the co-author of that, I just thought you'd like to meet him. So there he is. Say hi, Alan. All right. So we worked through this for quite a while. And as you know from the last video, once you work through all of the multi-lettered squares and rectify it, you wind up with several problems with the governors solved and the problem of multi-lettered squares solved. And you also wind up with the 8 reverse letters of Parawan, P-A-R-A-O-A-N, on the outside of the Great Table as if they're connecting it all together. Because this table, which logically flips into a cube, this is something Dee does often, right? He does it in the Monas Hieroglyphica with his rectilinear cross. He's got a cross and he takes the 4 right angles in the middle, moves them out, they become a square. That square flips into a cube. And the usual thing one does with this great table is you take these 4 watchtowers and put them in 4 cardinal directions. And then what is above and below becomes a whole nother question. But you are left with this L, and it seems to connect to El Exarpe. More on that in the other video. But I want to point out, just in case you haven't seen that there are very logical reasons in terms of Dee's habits of mind, so to speak, of why you would explode that Great Table of Earth, which appears to be 2D, into 3 directions and put each watchtower in a cardinal direction. The video which follows this in the series will look at relative directional attributions, because we also see that the only thing really consistent throughout Dee's diary is one of them being in the east and the others move around. But that'll be the next video in this series. Now, if you are used to having 4 of these in a Tablet of Union in the center, there's a logic behind it, but what you are working with will work better if you understand what that logic is. That is, what is being united there? There is similarly a logic to putting things this way. This is Aleister Crowley design on a double cubical altar, but remember, there's an implicit double cubical altar as early as Dee's Theorem 20, his implicit double cube or hypercube. So if you do this, it's still exploded in 3D. The faces are just facing out instead of in at the operator. So what I assume you know from that last video is that you understand what caused the problem of multi-lettered squares and how to solve it using material from Dee's Enochian grimoire. That is Sloan Manuscript 3151. If you have Kevin Kline's Complete Mystical Records of John Dee, it's in there. I'm also going to be referring to Casaubon's True and Faithful Relationship. That comes from the Cotton Appendix manuscripts. They're also in Kline. But the idea is that if you go through Dee's diaries chronologically, you will never solve that blind. If you look at 3191, which is not chronological, but appears to be kind of an end product, you can. And we know he's taken care assembling it. He has, well, for one thing, it's an extremely neat handwriting, and his chronological diary is very difficult to read. But we paid particular attention to a series of 4 grids in there. And then we also looked at the tabled out governors to a lesser degree. So I assume that you now know how this affects the sacred geometry of the Great Table. In effect, what it does, if you have worked in an Enochian space and got everything running and felt a toroidal energy flow, as many people do, it kind of explains why you're feeling that. If you are as clairvoyant as Alan was, he could even feel it rotating through its own center there. That is, the outside becomes the inside and the inside goes to the outside. It's a fascinating, and since Dee's mind is going to affect what comes through here, and Kelley's mind, of course, too, since he's scrying it, but we can assume that Kelley knows the Monas Hieroglyphica also, that this is matching in a certain way what's going on in Theorem 20 in the Monas Hieroglyphica, written 2 decades before. So, as far as I went last time, was ending with seeing how the outside L of El Exarpe connects to the letters on the Black Cross or Tablet of Union, and that's where we're going to begin here. Keep in mind how important just the letter L was, if you know the Monas Hieroglyphica. Dee goes on a long riff about that. It's a homophone for Aleph Lamed, God Most High, and also this mathematical transformation, a bunch of other things like that. Anyway, last video, we used these grids to correct the multi-lettered squares. We used a simple principle. The proof of it is excruciating, but the principle is simple. The governors govern the Great Table of Earth, so if there is a conflict between a letter in a square and a governor that should be in the square and they're different, the governor wins. Every single square on the Great Table of Earth has a governor in it, so that means there's a bunch of letters that aren't governors you just get rid of. And then all of these other problems resolve themselves. You see why there's no seal for the 65th governor. Parawan, you have a space for 2 other governors, Las Dixie and Lax Dizzy, that seem not to have seals and easily could, and you wind up with this L connecting to the Great Table of Earth. If you didn't see the last video, this will just sound like gibberish, so please go ahead back and watch it and come back and join us then. But the idea again is the governors govern the Great Table. A correction to a governor in Dee's Spirit Diary always trumps a correction to a non-governor letter. And you wind up with some very special governors that don't have seals, that is Parawan and Elixarape on the outside. And you have 3 governors that are here, but they're broken up in terms of letters a bit differently. We'll say why that is in a moment. But they're what bind everything together. So this is a copy of Klein's rendition of Sloan 3191. These old manuscripts are getting very degraded. I'll show you some from the original manuscripts before we're done, but it's a lot easier to use Klein. So he has 4 grids. This side you just push over because this is just the bookbinding. And this part is going to be the Black Cross. That's where the Tablet of Union is. So why don't we call it the Black Cross and find some way to, I don't know, hang a black cross in the middle of our room or something. So this is the first of those grids. This is the Raphael Reform tablets. And so we see here, Exarape, Ekoema, Ena, and Ta, Beitoem, usual things you have in the Tablet of Union written here in Roman letters. Now, this isn't in the same order. I'm going to discuss directional attributions in the next video. Then you have the governors. You probably can't recognize them. Most people can't, but they get reordered this way. We talked about why that was, and then these blinds are solved. All right, what letters correspond? If we if we link up this stuff that is the governors, it looks like a circuit diagram to letters. Here are the letters, and that it becomes the watchtowers of our great table. But notice there's not a black cross there. There's a black cross everywhere else. Now the note at the top will say what order to put things in, R, T, so this will go up here, and this one with a B will go here, and so on. But there's not a black cross here. Well, that's interesting. So we put the grid with the governors in the order of the Raphael recension, like governors govern the letters, we get this. And the black cross is basically what we've seen before. Exarape, Ekoema, Ena, and Tabe, Itoem. And why are there two of these? In the Tablet of Union, there's only one of each of these names. So there's a number of questions we're looking for answers to here. Are there two of each name on the black cross? The Tablet of Union must imply those two if they're the same thing. Do the angels tell Dee and Kelley about this or why to do it? And why does a ternary turn into a quaternary? Here I'm intentionally using language from the Monas Hieroglyphica because Dee seems delighted by talking about how his cross can be a ternary some of the time and a quaternary some of the time. I won't go through all that here except to say that having something that is three names and turning them into four names or two groups of four names, which is still a kind of quaternary, is something that again matches Dee's habits of thought. So let's go over the Black Cross. It contains most of three governors, that is, all but the L and Exarape, though they appear to be almost twice each, again, except for the L and Exarape. Unlike most of the others, they don't have seals. The only other one that doesn't have a seal is Parawan. The jagged lines that connect the letters are the seals. So these are the names of the governors. They're broken into four names on the Tablet of Union. Neither in Dee's chronological spirit diary or in Sloan manuscript 3191 do you see anything about a tablet of union. The closest we get, as I said, is marginalia and one comment about a cross of union. The rest of the time it's a black cross or spelled like this. We'd spell it like this. So, is there a difference? I already gave you a spoiler at the end of the last one. I just won't repeat the spoiler here. Just some other background. Remember with the governors, here's the first three. You get a seal based on what letters, but when you get these ones, there's no seal listed in Sloan 3191. Okay. And why wouldn't there be any seal? Well, because we have to link from that to here, or maybe from that to here. And how would you draw that? We already know this is a two-dimensional rendition of something we're used to exploding into 3D. And if the black cross is binding things in a higher dimension than that, maybe it's just something we can't draw, which is exactly what I would say it is. All right. What you have here is an excerpt from A True and Faithful Relation, Kassebaum's book. This is from one of the original printings. Actually, it's one that Justin Sledge brought to Enochian, which was kind of awesome. I will make it so it's easier for you to read this in a moment. But if you look down here, this is when Elexarape, Komananu, and Tabituim are coming in. And here is something that looks like the Tablet of Union. Okay? I'll blow it up some. Now this, instead of Heiko Emma, there's an N there, but that's just a typo in Kassebaum. If you compared it to the original manuscript, you can clearly see it's an M there. So in Klein, for example, he puts the Cotton manuscript in and replaces with an M. Somewhere out on the web is a listing of all the typos that someone, Ian Rons, found in A True and Faithful Relation. So it would seem from this that there is a tablet of union, but that is all Casaubon. If one thing that becomes really apparent when you look at the original is there are some of Dee's notes that are written in later, they're in a darker ink, and there are comments we'll see where he says Ave has told him to dwell in darkness because he didn't find what Ave told him to look for. Ave is going to tell him to look for all 8 letters. Dee doesn't realize that the 8 letters that Ave is talking about are the 8 letters around the outside of the Great Table of Earth, that is Parawan plus the L. So obviously, Dee has written down an original, gone and done something else, or he and Kelley have gone and done something else. Who knows how much time has passed, and then he's come back and written in this marginalia. So that becomes really critical when we look at the next section, which is the only place in Dee's manuscripts where something like a tablet of union appears. So usually Casaubon's transcription isn't that different, but it is at this point. Now, there are some questions we could raise about that. I won't unless, I don't know, if any of you, they relate mainly to another Sloan manuscript called Sloan 307, and Skinner and Rankin have that out as Practical Angelic Magic. If anyone has questions about that, I can answer them below, but I'm not going to bring it up now. So, Dee is going to write the 4 names that are now used in the Tablet of Union as a marginal note with a line running from Elexarape Komananu to Tabituim to this note that says, these be 3 names of the 10th air. 10th air is going to be pretty important. Remember, 10 is just a higher order monad. And he will put in an arrow to the letters. In other words, it's going to look like this. Now, it's really hard to read this now. The manuscript is degrading, and I've also blown it up. But remember how in Casaubon, he had a big table here. Well, this is marginalia Dee has written in over here. And then his note continues down here. And he's pointing up to Elexarape Komananu Tabituim. It gives a totally different feel if you realize that these are later notes put in. So, one of the things that we might ask is that why he breaks the 3 7-letter words into 4 5-letter words minus the L that are repeated twice. We don't know when he and Kelley realized that, but those are the 8-letter words he's being told about, and he does realize it at some point. You can tell from his marginalia that he realizes it, and you can also tell from the later manuscript, Sloan 3190. So let's look at the words, and I've made them larger so that you can read them better. Kelley will say, now he, the angel Ave, appears again and says, look out, Elexarape, with the 2 others that follow him among the names of the earth, the 3 left. Okay, there they are. 3 governors. Look out the name Parawan, write that out and avoid paper. Dee says, I have done so. Seek out Elexarape, I've found it. Look into the 4 parts of the table. And take the letters that are of the least character. Look among the 4 parts that have the characters and look to the characters that have the least letters. And Dee says, I have done. Ave says, how many letters are there? 7. And they say, there must be 8. So I would submit what is going on here is, and this may have occurred to you already, look to the 4 parts of the table. That's the 4 watchtowers, right? Take the letters that are of the least character. Remember, the governors with seals have fairly, have longer names, but there are these little dots. 2 dots, and in a couple cases, 1 dot. What do those turn into? Parawan and an L. A 7-letter governor and 1 other letter. So Dee says 7, and the angel says they must be 8, right, because there's the L in Elexarape, and there's Parawan. Or some people say Parawanu, however Enochian pronunciation is not an exact science. So 8 letters around the edge of the Great Table of Earth. That's what Ave is talking about. Incidentally, this is in a really cool section that we're going to have yet another video on, which is right before this. Ave is telling Dee and Kelley what the Great Table contains, and it's like, it's crazy stuff. It's like, this has all knowledge. And you're like, how can it contain all of that? Stay tuned. So it's 8 letters, but they must be 8. That could also mean 8 names. Either way, I really is more likely this, but 8 names because you're going to get the 4 names that we put in the Tablet of Union twice for 8. So that begs the question of why you get in the black cross here with those names, why they're mirrored and why they're doubled. Now, I've already submitted that I think that connecting the outside to the inside creates an implicit hypercube. Can I prove that? No. Alan could clairvoyantly see that, I could feel that, but I can't prove that. I will say, however, that you can think of the common thing in literary renditions of higher dimensionality of mirrored images and doubled images. A lot of that, now, it isn't that anytime you go to 4D, you get a mirror image. No, you don't. What this has to do with is how something that is 4-dimensional would interpenetrate something 3-dimensional. If you know of a book called Flatlanders that talked about that, looking at intersections between 2D and 3D, a lot of times you get these optical illusions when you are looking from one dimension, that is, you have eyes like ours used to seeing 3D, and you're seeing something 4-dimensional. And this is the case with any type of geometry. In D is mainly using overtly Euclidean geometry. He wrote the preface to the first English translation of Euclid, is trying to make Euclidean proofs in the Monas Hieroglyphica, but there's also a spherical geometry. Most of us have studied Cartesian geometry, and these grids lend us to do that. So you just add another perpendicular to have 3D, right? And then you'd add yet another one to have 4D. If you are using geometry of the kind that Buckminster Fuller talked about, things that Fuller talks about in 4, 5, and 6 dimensions are somewhere between what we would call 3D and 4D. Luckily for us in understanding this, these concepts of this have not solidified into a particular school of geometry. That is, he's Euclidean when it suits him, and when it doesn't suit him, it can be about the ethers. I talked about that a bit last time. All right, what we see here is Klein's rendition of the Cotton Appendix manuscript that has the same section that we just saw from Casaubon. Here's this great bit about what the table contains that we'll get to the video after next. But over here is how Klein has represented that marginalia. And it's a little bit closer. The one thing you can't tell from Klein is how clear it is that this was written later. But here this is tabled out like the Tablet of Union. It is the one place. So let's see, what do the angels say about that? And in fact, to read this, maybe we want to blow this up a little bit. So, Alexarpe, Komananu Tabituem, set down those 3 names, leaving out the first L. So D is written in a note. In other words, Alexarpe. Set them down by 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So we have 3 7-letter names becoming 20 letters, so it becomes 4 names of 5 letters each. Meanwhile, Kelley is having a migraine. That's making Ave sick. And there's the usual local drama going on. While Ave says, the first is Exarape, 5 in order, set them down without the first table. What does that mean? Without the first table. Outside of, but they look like they're inside. Well, by now we've seen the inside is becoming the outside. It's rotating through the outside. Set them down without the first table. That shall make the cross that bindeth the four angels of the table together. So this binds the table together. D says, have I now made this cross of uniting? On the next page, it's called a black cross or a cross of union. And after that, it's called just a black cross. Now, when you get things like you get in Sloan Manuscript 307, which is a 7th century manuscript, you do get it tabled out like this. But there's a good argument to be made that this was made directly from Casaubon, and then you'd see why it would be tabled out like that. If it was a direct continuation from D, well, it's ignoring 3191, which I don't think would have happened, and a lot of the names here are wrong. So just a side comment about that. If anyone is trying to do Enochian magic from 307, I mean, you can, but I don't think the tablets are rectified the way D and Kelley would have rectified them. Now, that leads us to an important question, the whole point of this video really, which is which representation is correct. You can have a tablet of union, which is what I use, or you can create something like this and just have an implicit black cross separating. You could even stick a tablet of union in there between your cubes if you wanted, which is correct. If you understand the principle and you are trying to let your perceptions be guided by that principle and feel the energetic flow following it, honestly, it doesn't matter. And that was a spoiler at the end of my last presentation. What you need to know is the black cross binds the great table. It binds the outside to the inside and keeps them flowing through. You can't draw a black cross out in any meaningful way. If you do, it's a representation, just like the tablet of union or table of union is. Once you have exploded the four watchtowers out in cardinal directions. The black cross connects the quadrangles of the great table of earth through that 4D kind of direction you can't see. In a way, it's sort of like a, I don't know, combination of a Enochian Escher painting. You have to understand what it is all. Beyond that, how you choose to represent it is up to you anyway. The best thing that we can do is put a representation of the cross of union in the center through which the rest of the great table rotates. And you can look at the numbering of those grids, and we'll talk about that in the next video, and get an idea even of how D seems to think it's rotating. Above, below, within, and without all merge in that 4D space where the hypercube rotates through its own center. And why would it be its own center? Well, here's a great thought experiment. If you were hearing something as opposed to seeing it in 4D, where would you hear it from? You'd probably hear it coming from within your own center. That is, there's not a good way for us to apprehend where it's coming from in a 3D universe. So, everything we've said about the outside connecting to the inside will become immediately relevant when we start talking about directional attributions also. Do cardinal directions even have any meaning in higher dimensions? Spoiler here, yes, they do. Actually, cardinal directions hold up in 4D. You get two more of them. But we'll take that up in the next video in this series. So we've finished this first one, did the second one. I was going to add relative directional attributions here, but I thought it'd make the video too long. Then we'll look at how the Great Table can contain what D and Kelley are told it contains. And that's where we're going. Thanks for hanging in here with me today, and I hope you learned something. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.